Miami, and for the past 3 years have been the co-convener of the Fresh Expressions movement in Florida. And so it's been a joy to learn the past 3 years, to do some Fresh Expressions myself and start some of the past 3 years, and now to really work at a church where I'm working to empower others as well to launch some Fresh Expressions in Miami. And I also have the great joy of teaching a little bit about what we've learned and hearing what you're doing and kind of working together to continue this work we do. Well, this is my, I came to Hershey when I was a child, came on a family vacation, went to Amish country as well, but I was able to preach at Camp Hill in November, and it's good to be back here. And I, like the last time, I think I mentioned this to you, when we went to the grocery store, I'm like, I feel like this is America. Like, I feel like I'm in like God's country, like where people are good and honest, and like, cause I'm from Miami, right? So I feel like my soul is going to be like, you know, renewed and cleansed just being with you all. So, but I've had that feeling over and over, like these are good people. Like, so it is good to be with you all, and I hope we all learn together and grow together. We'll open just with this short video that we created with Fresh Expressions Florida to introduce some to Fresh Expressions.
I wouldn't say that it was a dramatic turn or anything. It just kind of faded out of my life for a little while. I moved around to a couple different places and just never really settled into a place for long enough to have a church home.
I mean, I grew up in the church. It's hard to feel in a community, I feel like at my age.
God tends to work in small ways that people overlook.
I know that change is hard for almost everybody, but one of the things that as Christians we need to be willing to do is to accept change and welcome change and be a part of it.
Fresh Expressions is a way of doing church with new people in new places by new ways.
The word expression and the term Fresh Expression speaks to the diversity of movements that we believe the Holy Spirit is already stirring within people. A fresh expression could be 10 people. We believe a fresh expression might be 300 people packed into a coffee shop. We believe a fresh expression could be a missional expression of faith where people gather each week to do good in their community in the name of Jesus.
I feel like the church is somewhere that needs to be somewhere that people can go and learn what to do and how to be better, how to love more, how to be more welcoming, and how to move forward as a community together rather than just one church here and one church there, sort of pull together to move forward. That's what I would love to see.
Too many churches are only concerned about filling the pews and the seats and making all the bills be paid. And instead, we need to be about reaching out to the whole community, everybody, and inviting them and helping them see that God loves them just the way they are.
We need to be willing to embrace people in their situation, the way they live their lives.
I know a lot of people have expressed that they don't want their church to go away. They don't want it to be just replaced by something new. And no, of course not. The beauty of Fresh Expressions that I see is that not only can it work together with the traditional existing church, but it has to work together.
People express their love for people in many different ways, and God does the same for all of us. And so why should we hold it to a certain way when there's multiple ways to show God's love for people?
Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are heavy laden." He takes on our burdens. He cares about us, but he expects us to care about each other also.
Wipe away all the rules, wipe away all the discussions, wipe away all the inconsistencies, and all the finer things, and just love. Just love, feel comfort, and do the best you can. And that's definitely who I hope and feel that God is.
Okay, so our session is called the 5 W's of Fresh Expressions. And so I think that really this is sometimes the easiest way to get at the heart of something. And so today we'll really start with the why. Some of you have heard of Simon Sinek possibly. Have you heard of his book, Start With Why? And he says there, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And what you do simply proves what you believe. And so today, a lot of folks, and if you want to learn more kind of about future generations and what they care about and the questions they're asking, the book Start With Why would be really wonderful. It's Start With Why Leaders to inspire everyone to take action. And there he really talks about in the book how future generations are concerned with why you are doing something. And I think if many of us are honest, and if we did a little interview with some folks in our churches and said, why do you do this? They might have a blank stare on their face. Well, I can tell you what I do, right? But tell you why I do it, it might be a little hard for some folks to do that. And so I thought it's important for us to start with Fresh Expressions as to kind of why. Why Fresh Expressions? Why do we need it? What is it? Another quote from him is, value is not determined by those who set the price, value is determined by those who choose to pay it. So those who choose to pay it are really who? Those who are hoping come to our church, those who are hoping will kind of engage in the faith. And really kind of the value in it is kind of determined by those that are outside of the church. And then Henry Ford sums it up best. If I had asked people what they wanted, he said, they would have said a faster horse, right? A faster horse. And so part of what I do when I talk to groups about Fresh Expressions is I talk really about why we need it. And if we look outside and we look at the statistics of the church, if we get kind of out of our own little bubble, we see that the statistics really kind of tell the story. Oftentimes I like to talk about this when I talk about local churches as well. Our numbers really do tell a story, but oftentimes we're so caught up in the work of doing church that we really don't stop and look at the numbers of our local church or possibly the country. And so we start a little bit today letting those statistics tell the story. Now, for many here, this is the story possibly. For some of you, this is not the story. But most scholars say this will be the story. And so you might be in a smaller church or you might be in a larger, pretty healthy church. But even the larger church pastors in our conference have come to really embrace Fresh Expressions as they too have seen now a decline in their numbers, in their giving. And for the first time, they're having to stop and say, wait a minute, all this stuff that we've done, it's not really working anymore for some reason. And so the numbers of our country are now reflected in many of their churches as well. And so we see here 22% of Americans are religiously unaffiliated. 18% are white evangelical Protestants, 16% are mainline Protestants, 8% African American Protestants, 3% Latino Protestant. And then we also see, same statistics there, and then what we see is the percentage of population attending a Christian church each weekend is projected to continue to decline all the way through 2020. And so we see here really the population attending church on a weekend in 2020 would be 14.7% of our population compared to 1990, which was 20%. And so even when we look at that, only 20% of the population was actually attending a church, right? I wonder why even then back in 1990 we weren't saying, what's going on here? What's happening, right? And then we also look at the generations kind of involved in church. So we have builders born before 1946, the boomers, the busters, and then the bridgers. And so we see that percentage has gone down. How many of you all does that look familiar to your current church right now? That possibly the majority of the people in your church are those that were born before 1946, maybe some, maybe others, maybe it depends on when your church was birthed. And then we also see this church attendance. So attend church each week, roughly about 20%. We know that's kind of going it down. Not going to Sunday morning, 40%. And then we have don't go but claim would if attended, if invited. And half of these say they do, but they don't. So if you look at this, we have basically, in large numbers, about 80% of our population that's not involved in a faith community. And so when we put it all together, there's at least 40% of our population for which the Sunday morning worship service model will not reach. We need to have churches that focus on this percentage and on the other percentage. Both are necessary. And so I want to take a moment in your little book here. There's a place, and on the Y page, it says your church. And so I'd like for you to take a moment and fill this out, whether it's your church as a pastor or maybe the church you are leaving, whatever it may be, and fill this out. Who goes to your church? What does your church do? When does it do it? Where does it do it? And why does it do it? So if you could take a moment and fill that out. Really the 5 W's of your own church. Okay, now I want you to share with a neighbor what you discovered. Share with a neighbor what you discovered. So someone around you, turn to the front, turn to the back. Who, what, where, who's a part of your church, what does your church do?
No, I'd love to do it.
Okay.
12 years. We're mostly upper middle age. It's not families, it's not old, but yeah, I would say that's probably upper middle age, early desires, and they're dedicated to raising the generation.
5 minutes.
So that's like big. What is, I should say, Monday, coming from St. John's service projects, community funders, mostly Sundays, but I work out a couple of times. Where mostly even our order and advertising a couple of sites. Well, to fulfill that that's all. On a sign building relationships with God. The vision statement. That was the vision statement. When a vision statement, dream all of it is created. Love and service. We don't have anything planned. They do the core values of the building. On a sign. So like, to me, I want to I think they're ready for that. If they just whatever you want. No, they don't have to do this. Yeah, and I feel like it was they don't really they get more in the job. Yeah, I would say like even when I started understanding about respecting the time that was fascinating, maybe it's just not until 3-4 hours. Once the started 7, once 9 o'clock hit, I said, okay, whatever went wrong, but I need to respect your time. You've already given me 2 hours. And you have so many other things to do. And so even just like even on Sundays, I know we shouldn't be so focused on the one but even the same. Give me 1 hour. 5 to 10. And if I get them out even close to 10, like in it good, and they just seem to be more responsive. It's just because they just preaching, the sermons are like 45 minutes, children's messages, prayers, never under 2 minutes. And like I got up and I did like the whole congregational prayer. And then the offering prayer, I said like 14 so much like the students are also in process and hopefully just being together. Amen. And we'll turn around and the ushers for us.
Okay, just 1 more minute.
Yeah, so yeah, there's certain things to do that now. But like, to where people would in fact, the other thing it's not community, so I like it. It's just a whole bunch of work. And the guy's like, well, what up, Chris? That's what I used to do.
Okay. Does anyone want to share any similarities or synergies that you found with your conversation partner and talking about the who, what, when, where, why of your church? Was there anything there? I mean, you guys had some robust conversation. Does anyone want to share a little bit about kind of what they kind of sat down and thought about? Yeah.
I would say especially like the where, we're very confined to our churches or church-owned properties. We're not really too much out beyond our structures.
Okay. property is not really out. So that's probably the church building, maybe even the parsonage, right? Those are places where activity happens. Great, yeah?
And so just to piggyback on that, what the results of it is we're asking community folks to come rather than everyone moving up.
Right, we're asking people to come to us rather than going out. Yeah. Meeting them where they are.
I think we're realizing part of the reason why we haven't been like dramatically inspired to move beyond that is that people are still coming. You know, like we do have a good reputation in the community. People don't mind coming to our building, you know, so it's like very convenient for us.
Right.
Yeah. But there will come a point where that's maybe no longer.
Right, there's a preschool, it's cool. You see people a lot, there's activity happening now. What else?
When? Mine's at 9:30.
9:30.
I grew up in rural Methodist church. We had to have church after the cows were milked, but in the city we don't have many cows anymore.
So 9:30 on Sunday morning,
Absolutely.
right? How many other people would say the win happens Sunday morning? Right, some of us here, for the most part, the win happens on Sunday.
Sporadic activities like vacation Bible school.
Right,
Here and there, there's something.
right.
For service.
Wednesday night.
Wednesday night, yeah. And what about the who? Were there similarities in kind of who attends? Who are the people that are attending your church?
The ones that were baptized there.
The ones that were baptized there, okay.
Plus maybe 10% new people,
Okay,
but mostly,
Generations of baptisms.
yes. And I'm still learning who's related to me.
yeah.
And it's everybody, except me. It's everybody.
Yeah, anybody else have a thought about that?
Mostly retired.
Mostly retired, okay, which you know, oftentimes, sometimes is a huge gift because they have time, so that could be a blessing or a curse, right? They have time on their hands, so if we can put them to work, not working on us, that's always a good thing, yeah. Yeah, anybody else? Can we talk about the who? Yeah?
Some weeks multi-generational, but in general, white adults.
In general, white adults.
Over 65.
Over 65. Yeah. So I think in part why, you know, I like to do this exercise is because I really think the 5 W's of our own churches really give us a lot of the why as to why we need fresh expressions, right? We can really look at our own church and not just kind of look like this, but maybe even dig a little bit more into the data, and we'll talk about that later, and really be able to see why we need fresh expressions. We also know that most institutions have a life cycle, don't they? And the same like most institutions do, churches do as well. And so we see that in the beginning, there's a growth period, right? It's missional. We're doing something new. We're reaching out. And that's a foundation and growth period. So some of you all might have newer churches and maybe even have experienced that as a church. Has anyone here experienced that with the church? Been a part of a church plant or with the church during that kind of first growth period? Some of us have, but maybe most of us have not, right? But there's a certain amount of energy that goes with that. It's characterized by a clear belief system, right? If someone's going to sign up to something that they can't see, oftentimes they're really going to know why they're doing it. Healthy questions and focused activity. When you're starting something new, you don't have a lot of money to waste, right? And you haven't been wasting the same money for years. And so you really do have to be focused and clear about where you're going and what you're doing. But then, like most organizations, you kind of reach a point that's a stabilization period. So it's characterized by lapsing momentum and the need to refocus the mission to emerging new social contexts, right? And then you possibly have a decline. And that's really an institutionalized period. So characterized by operational, ideological, and ethical doubt that cannot remember what made the organization successful. So oftentimes, if the institution doesn't look back and refocus and find kind of its meaning all over again in a new place, in a new time, it begins to do what? To decline, right? So can anyone here think of possibly an organization or businesses that you've seen possibly decline or possibly reinvent themselves? Okay, yeah, tell us a little bit about that. Are you a Harley fan?
No, just to teach women corporations, just that they got used to a product, and that was their product, and they thought they could live off of that product forever, and they realized that other things were infiltrating what they were doing. They're coming out with bigger and broader ideas, and they had to go back and reinvent themselves, and that was actually going down the 90s, that they reinvented themselves.
Yeah, that's a great example. Anybody else?
Well, decline, we see, Bon Ton's going out, Applebee's is closing a lot of restaurants. Burger's very visible, obvious. All of a sudden they're declining. It's like, whoa, man, everybody has their expensive Burger basket. We see the companies that failed to stay with. Now everybody's competing with Amazon. Amazon merged with Walmart, maybe, and that's going to destroy everything, I guess.
Speak it, Prophet.
Yeah, right. Even Sheepskin put Small Paul gas station under. Of course, New York Runners competes with Sheets, I guess. But yeah, we see the merging and the idea. Well, I'm a turnaround guy, so I go to the troubled churches and we do this. But we restart. Now, the problem with the restart is you're starting with the existing congregation, so it's a mentality thing, and you shrink before you go. You kick a lot of people out before you bring a lot of people back in. But it's one of those things, at the top is when you always start the new life cycle. Right. Knowing that decline is going to happen, so you're always creating new life cycles, whether it's children's department, youth department, adult, whatever, and getting them off campus, getting them here and there. So, but yeah, we have a lot of illustrations of business. I've been in New York 4 years. We've had 3 merges already with the Methodist churches merging with us and working on a 4th one just because we don't need 8 churches in 4 miles. It's ridiculous. So, especially with buildings we can't afford with 14 people in it. So, it's one of those things where you choose to be efficient or you choose to accept decline, and what are you going to do? You're not united, or you're just competing against each other because, we have to survive because Grandpa built the building. So, it's just one of those things where at the top is when you create the new life cycles. You're always going up, always going up. But we see it in business, and it's a choice. So, okay, church, you can't stop this from happening. What do you want to do? And the security of having the money, because usually the churches I go to were once the wealthy white churches. So, and they got so depending on their money. Now it's like, oh wait, we don't reflect our community at all because we all moved away. So it is a thing where weekly, daily, moment by moment, keeping the edge of, what is causing us to no longer exist.
Right,
Keeping that threat
exactly.
in front of us.
Well, there's a few companies and organizations that we've seen over the last few years that have done some of this, and it's interesting the ways in which they've done it, right? So we know that McDonald's was kind of experiencing a little bit of decline. I have a McDonald's, I used to, right across the street from my church, and I love McDonald's. It's one of my vices. Fast food, I'm working on it. Taco Bell and McDonald's. I don't really do it that much, but when I do, I go big. And so there's this McDonald's, and we heard McDonald's was kind of declining, but then probably about 1.5 years ago, they did something. Does anyone remember? To kind of refresh, to bring in a new crowd of folks. The menu, coffee. Anybody else know exactly what it was? They started offering breakfast all day. And specifically in bigger cities, right? So breakfast wasn't only at one time, but now you can get an Egg McMuffin all day long. And so they had kind of this set menu, but it actually brought in this whole new resurgence of clients that wanted breakfast all day or at the end of the day, or if they were just coming in from the club at whatever time, or recovering at 2 p.m. in the day, they could go to McDonald's and get breakfast. Another fast food giant is Burger King. So Burger King actually started in Miami, if you didn't know, and some of the past CEOs have actually been Methodist. But they went through a time where they really were trying to figure out who they were. And one of the ways that they kind of revamped themselves, actually, the board at the time said, actually, we're going to bring in all new people. So we're gonna run our company now as a startup. So we're no longer an institution. We're gonna shave back a lot of our employees, shave back the number of our employees, and we're gonna hire younger, hungrier people to run this giant, right? And so that's what they did. And so they actually, a kid I used to babysit for, was hired as the youngest CFO at the age of 26 of Burger King. And they ran the whole company like a startup, offering now, beer at certain Burger Kings, new menus, burger bars, all of these things, really trying and testing. And for the board, they knew this could either crash, right, or this could go really, really well. And so luckily, it's gone pretty well for the most part too. This also happened, I've been in the development world a little bit with things that we're doing with our church, but there's one developer who we chose to work with us. And this developer as well, after the market crash, he said, I really need to move into a new direction. I have this kind of condo luxury market, but there has to be something else out there. And so what he did is he hired all 28-year-olds to be the principals of his development firms and created kind of a new product that now is a signature product of how they do things. And so these are examples of companies stopping and saying there could be a huge decline here, right? And working in ways to reinvent themselves. Part of that, personnel sometimes. Part of that's changing what you offer or when you offer it. So I like to share these stories just because it's important for us to know as the church that we're not the only ones that are really being affected by a cultural shift, right? By this technological revolution. Many of you probably know people that have retired from one career at about 55 and are looking to another career. My mom's an insurance agent, so she just sold her agency. She can't quite get, how people could buy insurance online. What are they thinking, right? And so she's having to shift and move into a new career. And it's so funny because she's going through all of this while I'm working with a church that needs to kind of reinvent itself. And for years, we just found all of these similarities. She's a very people person, so all of my clientele is aging, right? And so rather than kind of reinvent herself in the insurance world, she decided just to sell, right? And in many places in our churches, we also are selling some parts, right? Or merging in some places. So I think it's important for us to know as leaders, and many of us as business people, because we have to put that hat on, that we're not the only ones dealing with this, right? It's not just the church is horrible, our message is old, is Jesus really real, right? None of that's true. The whole country is really, the whole world really is kind of readjusting to this new reality. So I hope we can find hope in that we're not the only ones kind of sitting at the top or towards the bottom asking, how do we restart ourselves? So hopefully that can give us hope. So why we need fresh expressions and why do they matter? And I think for many of us in our churches, they mobilize God's mission force and established and inherited congregations. And so part of that is just even talking about fresh expressions, even talking about something new, in some ways possibly helps rally your church around new vision, right? Around a new marker, whatever that might be. Some of you here, there's all kinds of fresh expression words we use, like inherited congregations. One of you in here talked about all the families, right? Learning all the families. Well, one of the things, and maybe you're seeing this in Pennsylvania, I know we do see it in Florida, in Georgia, in the Southeast. But one of the cultural shifts that's happening is that people are no longer inheriting churches. And so our Bishop Carter grew up in South Georgia, and he's the first of 4 generations not to live on his family's property. Anybody here have that as an example? You're the first one that just kind of left, didn't go back, right? And so, and actually both of his siblings don't live on the family property, which means what? They don't go to the family church, right? They don't tithe the family church. So oftentimes in smaller communities, what we're seeing, and kind of a larger cultural shift in general with millennials, is people are moving to bigger cities, aren't they? they're wanting to live where more stuff is happening, or possibly they just have jobs that have taken away. And I think maybe in Pennsylvania, you might know factories and all of those things. The world is changing, people are kind of moving. And for years, churches really functioned on the model of, well, the next generation will keep this up, right? But that's just not happening anymore. And there's no real reason to point a finger. It's just the reality of kind of what it is. In my church, we have an interesting dilemma. We are in a city, but the people that started our church, they were the children of those, or the grandchildren of those who started the church in 1896, and so they really counted on their children to kind of continue that, but all their children moved out of Miami and went to Orlando. And so we have this whole section, this whole age of people who really were to continue those traditions and continue tithing and continue teaching Sunday school, who have all moved somewhere else. They didn't inherit their parents' church. And then Fresh Expressions create the capacity for a mixed economy church, providing space for innovation, innovative mission, and existing structures. And so just a few words about another kind of key word is mixed economy, or really kind of mixed ecology. And so that's really a church that has both the traditional service on Sunday morning, right, but also has fresh expressions happening at the same time. And really those two things possibly could even happen simultaneously or feed one another. One of my favorite Fresh Expressions stories comes from Western North Carolina, and there was a pastor who was a previous paddleboarder, Olympic paddleboarder. And his church is right by the Nantahala, and so during the summer, he thought, well, what would it mean if I started a church on the river? There's all these people that come in. What if I could do that? And so he began just to make friends on the river, just paddleboarding with some of the sport suppliers, and then he made friends with the guy who owned the bar on the river, and the guy said, yeah, you can have this space if you want a worship service. Here, go ahead, go for it. And he was working in a church where Bishop Carter would say he was underappointed. And so he had a lot of gifts. He was paid 40 hours a week, but there wasn't a lot going on. And the church people were totally happy with that, right? Just have a good service for a Sunday. We'll leave a good offering, and that's just all we want from you. But in his heart, he wanted to do more, right? And so he asked for permission to start this river church. And so they started this river church, and it happens on Sunday mornings on the Nantahala River. And then after that, they go paddleboarding or have some kind of breakfast or whatever it might be together. And it's drawn all kinds of new people, specifically families, to the church. And the river church, right? So not the actual physical building, but the river church. And they take up an offering there. After about 6 months, they said, well, we're going to take an offering because the main church kind of pays for itself. All this offering is going to go to build wells in Haiti. And so now they've built 39 wells in Haiti and have taken 4 trips over there as the river church, right? But what happens when you have the river church and you have families coming? Families oftentimes have what? Kids. And so how do kids learn about Jesus, right? How does Christian education happen within a Fresh Expression? We're kind of exploring new ideas there, but one thing that's happened and provided a bridge to the main institutional church was Sunday school for children. So he said, you know what? One of the people said, can we bring our kid to Sunday school? And the pastor said, sure, that's great. Bring him to Sunday school. The people asked for it. And so it provides this bridge back and forth. And so some of the people in the institutional church that kind of live on a missional edge will say, can I go to River Church for a few months, Pastor? Is that okay? Pastor's like, sure, come on over. So they go and they meet new people. And then some people from the River Church also go back to kind of the main institutional church to get Christian education for their children or for themselves. And so in many ways, that's a mixed economy church, a church that has several different diverse things going on. So there's a phrase that I learned when I was in youth ministry, and we use this oftentimes with youth, asking them to do new things, whether it's pray every day or something like that. And we say, if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. And so this phrase has always stuck with me. If I always go to McDonald's, I'm always going to gain extra weight, right? That's just kind of a truth. But, so I've always said kind of, this is a true phrase, right? Until I got to the church that I'm currently at. And most people were under that impression. If we just do what we've always done better, then we'll get the results, right? But after a while, it actually proved to be not true, right? Doing the same things that we've always done aren't producing the same results that we've always gotten. And so that was really kind of a tough reality for us to live with. Well, let's try this again, and let's try it with more robust passion, right? And let's try it with 10 more hospitality ushers. And we're gonna have not Folgers coffee, but we're gonna get Starbucks, right? So we're gonna do it better. And we're gonna see, we're gonna have what we had in the 50s. But we're seeing now that that's not always the case, right? And so part of working with our congregations is helping them to understand this big reality. It's important as well because what I've seen kind of in some churches I've worked at is some shaming from older generations to younger generations, right? So why aren't you teaching Sunday school all of a sudden? Like, why don't you teach Sunday school? And this comes from a woman who's 83, who never worked, right? And stayed home with 2 kids, and badgering young moms about why they don't teach Sunday school. Well, if you just would teach Sunday school and spend 15 hours a week on your lesson, then we will have what we had before, right? But we're seeing that that's not true. So it's important to have these conversations as we change the culture of kind of our church. So the second W is who. Who do you know that does not go to church? Why do they not go to church? So talk to the person next to you or around you and talk about name specifically people that you know that do not go to church and why they don't go to church. Do we know people that don't go to church, or do we only know our church people? It might be kind of hard, right? Who do you know that doesn't go to church, and why? And you know what? We often don't think about this, but it might be a family member, right? Sometimes we just got to think real close, and we can name 5 or 6 people. So who do you know that doesn't go to church, and why don't they go? Talk to your partner, write it down.
My immediate family, my sister goes to church when it's convenient. My mom, same way. But everybody else, no. They don't go. I haven't had to take another single. That's something to be honest. Kind of shocked. The strongest thing in Catholic Church, but then for me, it's like in college. The one that probably just the we were both Christian college.
My sister and brother maybe back.
At school, I'm not invested so much in making sure that we get together.
So maybe a shirt.
My kids, they're
Okay. Take another minute. Okay, so let's share with the group, and you don't have to name names, you know, or say it's your kid or your dad or whoever, but tell us a little bit about who you know that doesn't go to church and why they don't go.
People that have been offended.
Okay, people who have been offended.
Along with that, a woman who's my age, 30, 31 years old, who stopped by during the presidential election because she couldn't stand the rhetoric that was coming out of people's mouths in the church. And didn't put on the board.
a disgruntled Catholic who's married to someone who was never particularly interested and now really just is too busy.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Somewhat younger than me, mostly outdoor kind of people that they're not disgruntled with the church. They don't have any issues with the church, but they see us church people living into the reason why we go, which is it's been generationally what we've always done. And so they see that and they're like, hey, that's great, but that's not a compelling reason. So they see us not living into a compelling why, and so there's no, and again, there's no disgruntledness, but it's just like, there's just no reason to go. So
Habit is not
that's kind of why, well, it's never been a habit.
right.
Yeah, so they're just,
That's the thing, they're raised not valuing the experience, so they don't feel like they're missing anything.
yeah.
And I wonder if that manifesto we were talking about, I wonder if that was underlying some of the periphery that we hear of why people don't come to our church, whether it's we don't like to sing hymns or I sometimes feel like if we could recapture the why, some of the, often laundry list of things that this person would come to church if church was like this, and it's like, but I know that I can make church just like you want it, and I would still probably only see you two. You know what I mean? But if we could recap, but changing those peripheral things isn't changing the why, the deeper thing. And so we were talking about, I wonder if there's, and I think you nailed it, I wonder if there's something underlying the excuses that we sometimes hear from people, more surfacey excuses, because I've not heard, that's one that I've not heard people say, but I often have wondered, is that what they really would like to say, but on the exterior, it's easier to nitpick that, like, oh, the sermon, or oh, the music, or whatever.
Right, and oftentimes the people who are telling you are not those people, they're the people that might know those people, right?
Exactly.
So actually the people that are are like, church, yeah, don't really know why they go, so I don't really know why I would go, right? But their grandma's telling you, well, I know Kelly would really like it if we had a drummer, right? Or, I know Kelly, I mean, we just need to get back to the Apostles' Creed, right?
What's an Apostles' Creed?
Yeah, right? We just need to get back to the Apostles' Creed and people will come. Yeah.
My son said, you all go to church, but you don't do anything. The people at my school do more good things in the community than all those church people put together. And that was like, ooh, mouth of baby.
Yeah. Who else? Yeah.
I serve in a town right now that prior to 1968 there was an EUD church and a Methodist church, and they're a block and a half apart. And they worship together, and we alternate buildings every week. So like this past Sunday we were at Trinity, next Sunday we'll be at Grace. And I've had a lot of people from that community come up to me and say, you know, we'd really like to come to church, but we won't because, you know, these people can't get their act together. You know, they're maintaining two buildings because, you know, well, my grandfather was buried there, I was married there, I was baptized there, whatever. And I under the why I even said to fill a religious obligation, you know, and that's really what they're doing, because after you see them Sunday morning, don't bother them the rest of the week. But, you know, we're supposed to be this united body of Christ, but we can't do that because we have to hold on to what was.
Right. People just kept going to the wrong building the wrong week. You could have like a trolley between the two, like just in case. Yeah. Yeah. What else?
Put a red light.
Who do you know?
Churches.
I think just get over the habit sometimes. You know, just went out their life, and then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, something's going on Sunday morning. It was easy to stay in bed and read paper and have a relaxing morning.
Yeah, and often nobody calls them.
Right.
So,
Hey, we used to, right?
right.
Read paper.
Or children's schedules.
Children's
Like
schedules.
football and
Yeah.
baseball. We can't do this because every Sunday there's a game that reminds us.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting generationally. So I always say the person I know who doesn't go to church is my little sister. And so she's 10 years younger than me. And I grew up, we went to church every week. We were in all the choirs. We went on all the trips. My mom was a chaperone. My mom came every Wednesday to Kids Club and did the snack. This was our life, probably the center of our life even, for the most part. But my little sister, she was a part of that. I think she got her 3rd grade Bible. And then she started doing volleyball, right? And so volleyball just took over. They traveled. That's how my mom really got out of going to church every week as well, traveling with volleyball. So there's no particular, with my little sister, there's no real anger towards the church. She just kind of drifted away, right? So the Church of England and the British Methodist Church are really those that started doing fresh expressions about 20 years ago. And even a little bit before that, probably the early 90s. They kind of saw what was ahead. And they said, we really need some new, fresh ways of doing church. And that really came through bishops and people that were higher up who gave pastors permission to do that. And so there were 3 initial categories that they kind of named. Christians, those who are existing church-going Christians. De-church, those who have had some previous meaningful contact with the church community over a period in their lifetime but have since left. And non-church, those who have had no meaningful contact with the church community during their lifetime. And so non-church could also be unchurched as well. Unchurched. So these were kind of the 3 initial categories that they would put someone in. And so we've named some of those already, haven't we? Those that are de-churched. They came to church maybe as a young person, but were turned off, or even someone in their early 30s and couldn't handle the language during a political season. Or maybe those that are unchurched. They've actually never been to church and don't understand why anyone would go. Right? Okay. We've kind of gone through each of these. So then there's the emergence of kind of 6 categories from there. So the church, we talked about all of those. Now they're seeing in England those that have grown up in a fresh expression. So this refers to someone who's been a part of a fresh expression from early childhood. Simple D church, those who began being part of church either as an adult, teenager, or child, but left church for a period of more than 2 years before attending the fresh expressions of church. Complex D church, those who began being part of a church either as an adult, teenager, or child, but left the church for a period of more than 2 years, returning to church, and have since joined the fresh expressions church. Simple non-church, those who were not part of a church before attending the fresh expression of church. And complex non-church, those who were not part of a church before attending church prior to attending the fresh expression of church. And I can send to anyone this whole presentation to get that. But this really was a study put on by the Church Army in England. So they got funding, and for a year they went to all the fresh expressions in the UK, and really kind of these 6 characters emerged. Now on your paper, I think those that have emerged in our work here so far are those that are de-churched, went to church, no longer go to church. And then there are those subcategories where it's open de-churched. So someone who's left church, but is open to coming back to church. So these are a lot of the folks I work with through our yoga chapel at First UMC of Miami. Many of them are first-generation immigrants. They were raised Catholic. They left the church. They moved to America. They don't really go back to the church most of the time for boredom, out of routine, Sunday morning. Sunday is fun day in Miami. You don't really, go to church. But they're open to faith, and they're open to spirituality. So yoga chapel on a Wednesday, we pray. I like to pray. I have no problem with prayer. I love God. Yeah. Oh, a pastor? You're even a woman? That's even better. Great, let me come and talk to you outside of yoga chapel. And so that's really the folks that I saw at yoga chapel. And it's important to really form missional strategies around who you're working with, right? So I knew with the open D-church folks at yoga chapel that I could talk about God right away, that I could pray. All of those things were totally fine with them. And that would be different, though, if there was a group that gathered that was closed to church. So closed is, I had this hurtful experience, and I'm actually pretty closed off to church in general. I don't know what I think about God, definitely don't know what I think about the church. So possibly, with a closed church model, the strategy might be, the missional strategy might be a bit different. So currently, right now, our church, we moved out of our building, and our offices are in a co-working space called WeWork. Some of you might have heard of WeWork. I think they're in some larger cities and they're around the world. And so our goal from the beginning was to start a service in WeWork. And of course, when we first went to one of the first WeWorks, they were like, oh, sure, yeah, you can have a service. We're like, oh, they just want us to sign a contract. This will be very different when we go into the WeWork, right? And so they built a new WeWork downtown, and we went in, and one of the people that works at the desk, his name is Tyler, and he's responsible for writing all the welcome cards to all the new members that have their office in WeWork. And so in our office building, there's 14 floors of offices, and they're like Royal Caribbean's renting 4 floors for a year as they build their new office somewhere else, but then there's also architecture firms, law firms, new startups, whoever it might be. And really the job of WeWork in some ways is the job of a club, or even some might say a church, but the people that work at WeWork, the building managers, don't really focus on the plumbing. They focus on building community in the building. So they have happy hours on Thursdays, they have Monday sit and chats and all these activities they plan throughout the week to really build community within the building. And so Tyler wrote our card and he thought, oh, great, we have a church in our building. And he didn't tell us that right up front, And then they put the logo on, so you give the logo, and it was like a month. I'm like, do they not want to write that we're a church on our on our door? What's going on here? Which I was like, I understand, that's fine, right? And so little by little, we kind of got to know WeWork, and they got to know us a little bit. And later on, Tyler told us, I was a little fearful of what this church kind of would be like. But you all are completely different than I ever thought about church. And I don't know if I'll ever come to your church, but I'm really glad to know you all. So part of what we do at our church is a homeless ministry, so we started to do peanut butter and jelly parties at WeWork. And now everyone calls me the mayor of WeWork, because I know everyone at WeWork and they know me, right? And so it creates this whole new, different dynamic, right? And so pretty soon, hopefully in the next few months, we'll start a service there called The Story, right? Not The Story Church, just The Story, and we're inviting people to share their stories. And so really our discipleship plan and our mission plan looks very different than Yoga Chapel, right? Where I could go right in and I can pray and I'm automatically their pastor and there's this trust. But we've had to work a long time on kind of building trust, right? And getting to know people. And so then we have a plan of kind of the speakers that we'll bring in. And it's not until next October that we're actually bringing someone in to talk about the Bible, but a different kind of way to think about the Bible for those who are kind of curious. So there's different missional plans for each of these different groups that kind of we work with. Some take longer, depending on where they are, but this is why a little later we'll talk about listening, why listening is so important, and really knowing the context, because that really determines kind of your missional and discipleship plan. So then there are those that are unchurched, they've never been to church before, but they're open to church, and then there are some that are closed to church, not really open to church, not really open to God for a variety of reasons. So as we talk about this, in what category would you place the person you mentioned earlier who does not go to church, and why? You can talk about it with your neighbor. You can talk through it. Maybe you want to create a new category. That's great.
Well, I would take who's raised I would say probably for half another man get up in church and I would say that most would probably for both I would say and I would say it's not to be like a really one well, they're not doing it. So I got to do it.
Okay. Anyone want to share the category, or maybe you made up a new one? That would be awesome. Anyone want to share the category that they placed their person in, or?
We created a new category.
Yeah.
Yes, we did. Well, Drew knows somebody who is closed.
Some parents are atheists, opposed to church, but then they're, yeah, that's a good question. And then I think there's this interesting thing that they like their kids to go to like our vacation Bible school. They're our neighbors, and so they're okay with their kids participating in church, but they have really no desire themselves to participate.
That was like my parents until 4th grade. We went to all the PBSs in town. Like by the 6th one, we had to like not act like we knew the songs, right? Because it was kind of embarrassing. It was like free childcare, you know. There were 7 of us, so yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Well, we've talked about why we need fresh expressions and really the who fresh expressions are for, right? And that's important to remember as we go through this. So fresh expressions predominantly aren't for the people that are already in your church who just want to form something new or have decided they actually don't want to come to church on Sunday, so let's do it some other way, just with our same group, right? But it's for people that are not in the church. And now we're going to spend a little bit of time on what. And so a fresh expression of church catalyzes new expressions of church with new people and new places and in new ways. So new people, new places, new ways. Now, sometimes I think about, really I think if you have, at least the new people, maybe you have the new way, but you don't have the new place. Or maybe you have the new place, but you don't have the new way. And so we encountered a church in Key West, and they have worked with local musicians, and they hire one every week, and they have cafe church, and it does start at like 10 a.m., but they have all new people coming to it, people who haven't been to church before. And they hire local musicians to play the music, and one guy comes the first week of the month, the other guy comes the second, and it's people that have not darkened church doors in years. And the pastors told me, I said, Terry, I heard you were doing this incredible thing down in Key West. It's fresh expression. She's like, we're not a fresh expression. We meet in a church. We're not a fresh expression. I'm like, you totally are a fresh expression. These are all new people, and you're doing this in a new way. Your cafe church is coffee, and you sharing a little bit of an inspirational story and listening to inspirational music. This is definitely a fresh expression. So sometimes in the fresh expressions world, when you're living kind of in a bubble, some are very quick to say, that is a fresh expression, or that isn't a fresh expression. And even our bishop put a lot of pressure. Audrey, we have to make sure that these people aren't just crop up and thinking they're having fresh expressions. I'm like, just let them explore. Like, maybe if they think it enough, it'll become it, We won't add them to our list, but let's not tell them right away, like, you're not this. Fit into this box. So some folks, when they hear this, they say, well, we do a church service, but it's in a bar, so we're not a fresh expression. I'm like, no, you're in a new place. You're reaching new people that would never come to your church ever, right? So just because you're doing a hymn-sing church at a bar and using the old hymns doesn't mean that you're not a fresh expression. So I always warn people when I talk about new people, new places, new ways, because sometimes people think, well, I have to check every single one of these boxes, right, for this to be a fresh expression. But I really think new people is the most important part, and then being able to do it in a new way or in a new place is also important. So in fresh expressions, we like to kind of think about this image of a dock. I was just at St. Simon's Island, and this is kind of what I saw. It was really quite sad. There were kind of all these docks, and then the water was kind of way out, right? Kind of a sad reality. And so when this happens, what do we do at times? What could you do if you kind of had this dock and it didn't quite meet the water? You couldn't really bring the water back to you, right? Kind of how do you, or the water kind of comes in and it comes out, how do you really solve this problem? There's another picture of kind of a dried up dock here. What are some possibilities? What could you do? You could extend the dock into the water. There you go, right? These folks, I think, have extended it like 80 times, right? Right here. That's one option. You could extend the dock into the water. What else?
Push the boat into the lake.
You could push the boat into the lake, okay?
We're clearly not.
Yeah, well, also, possibly, you could also possibly, they have these things called floating docks, which I saw for the first time at our camp when we had a group of rowers come from Canada. They come to our Methodist camp in Leesburg every year, and they usually come when the councils are training, and they would bring their own floating docks because of this very thing. They didn't know kind of where this would be, so they'd ship them down, bring them back up to Canada, and so really they could have a dock, they could have a pillar wherever they are because it's floating, right? And so this is a bit more flexible, isn't it? You could really put the dock, wherever you want. It could be out kind of in the middle of the lake, right? It could come back to the center of the lake. You see here that there was, one dock, and then they built a dock beside it that had kind of floating mechanism here. And so really we like to use this image with Fresh Expressions because oftentimes the church is kind of, dried up, right? The water's gone out, and we're like, we're just here, and the water's there, and we don't really know what to do. How do we reach? And really this idea of a floating dock helps remind us of the importance of really being able to be flexible and agile and to move and go kind of where the water is and where the people are. And I like this image of the two docks next to each other. So you have the older dock, which is still there, and clearly the water is there now, right? The old dock's not in sand. But then what they did is they built a new dock beside it. Now they didn't blow up the old dock, right? So kind of what we've encountered in Florida with some of our younger clergy coming in is they just want to come and blow up the old dock, right? Possibly in their preaching. Possibly in just reckless decisions that are made to kind of get to this new dock, right? Sometimes we feel like we have to blow up the old dock to get to the new dock, right? But we don't always have to do that. And part of the integrity of Fresh Expressions is realizing that both docks matter, right? And realizing that one dock needs the other dock for a variety of reasons. So that's happened in some churches, and pastor will come in and blow up the dock, and 8 people leave, and now they're going to have to be paid half as much, right? Or the budget's going to have to decrease by half as much because they blew up the old dock, right? Which gives them really no funds or time to actually create the floating dock. So it's important as we work in terms of Fresh Expressions and we do what we do, we realize the importance of both of these docks. And so we have here really kind of the church on one side and then the people on the other. And we have option 1, just to stay that way, right? Option 1, we just stay as we are. Church over here, the people over there. That's just how it is, right? Option 2 would possibly be to build a bridge. So come on over on the bridge. So we're going to build a bridge to you. The bridge might be BBS, right? Here's the bridge to you. Come on over. So that's option 2, and that's wonderfully successful most of the time. And then we have option 3, where we actually bring the church or some semblance of a church over to people. They don't actually have to cross over the bridge to find Jesus. So some of these images are always helpful when talking to people about Fresh Expressions, because I can only imagine many of you have learned about Fresh Expressions before, and part of your task is really working with your church to kind of create this culture, right? And so it'll be important for the church that you're working with to know that you're not going to blow up their dock, right? And this is where many of us as pastors, we sit in this very interesting moment in time where we really have to do both, right? We really have to care for both. And so we need to show up and maybe help, decorate the chrismons, right? And really learn about the chrismons and create a really great service about the chrismons, right? And at the same time, we really need to learn how to kayak and get to know the kayaking community, right? And possibly start a church with people that are kayaking, right? So we have this very interesting place in time as pastors, and we're really balancing in many ways the old with the new and constantly negotiating in our mind where we need to spend our time and what we do. And both are very important, right? Both are very important. Okay, now on your paper here, I want you to work alone right now. And at the bottom it says, what makes church church? If you could only keep 5 things to be church, which 5 below would they be? Circle the 5 you believe are essential to being church. So you could only choose 5. Don't cheat with your neighbor. Okay, we're going to compare answers with your neighbor and then everyone else. So remember, this is you. What do you think? I caught you.
Debating.
No, exactly. That's what we want. But we'll do it with the whole group. What do you need? What do you need? This is always a lot of fun when you have a lot of lay people in the group.
How many lay do we have in here today? 2, 3, 4, 5.
That's when really fists come out.
And this is only half the group, and as I went upstairs, I pulled up when some people were late getting down because of traffic, and the shuttles stopped at 1, so that way next year we're going to stop shuttles at 1.
Oh, yeah.
So that there's a lot that's coming by.
They're running on Miami time.
Is that slow?
Yes. I was talking with someone the other day about peak days, and the stadium doesn't fill up until, 30 minutes, 45 minutes into the game. Yeah.
Well, yeah,
people just run late. Like, it's not important that you see the whole game, it's important that you look good when you go to the game.
That's right.
And then take a great picture. That's what's important.
When I was in North Carolina, the service started at 11 o'clock, and of course, in the north, we were there at 11 o'clock, and nobody else was there.
Right. Okay, so now talk to your neighbor. Talk to your neighbor about what you circled. Are there similarities in what you circled? Are there differences in what you circled?
She broke the Well, yeah, that's why. So, like, I don't think trips people. Like, the idea of like going to the local food or going to someone's house. why do we need that like that?
Well, there needs to be, well,
Okay.
you know,
Don't back down.
how do you, I guess it all depends on how you view the role of a pastor. I think there needs to be some kind of, you know, that's why I always say I don't like to fly by the seat and just knocking on the seat. They don't answer anything. It's just whatever they want to do. Whereas like we have a bishop who kind of, well, try to keep us in check. So, you know, you don't want a church just out there willy-nilly doing this and that. So I think we have some kind of leadership role to say, you know, let's support this.
Is that person
Well, I didn't say money was necessary.
That's why I wondered, if that person is not paid, you don't have any money.
Yeah.
So you want somebody in an official capacity, even if they're like, let's just say Bible teacher, really they're, let's say they're a full-time teacher, and they're a pastor as well. You just want them to have that.
Even certified lay ministers, I consider them pastors. I mean, they preach, you know, they're not allowed to sacraments,
which is another theological quandary we can discuss on another day, but not in front of a board.
But yeah. But so, I mean, I just see a pastor as kind of that leadership person, and so I think that's what we have to somebody to steer the boat.
So I think it's important to answer that. Like video class, is it like Christian conversation? So when did you be able to travel? Right. So that's it.
Bibles, prayer group, and worship. Hannah added you.
It was really hard for me not to put the work in.
I can imagine how hard
The one church unfortunately doesn't have work.
should bring you about it. Are you caring about what organ it is?
Well,
trying to get rid of it?
When they take my stuff to Bridgewood, they can just stop picking up.
Okay, so let's just share a little bit about the 5 things that you circled. Was there disagreement with someone next to you? What was something that was up for grabs? What was something that you couldn't live without, but your neighbor was like, that totally can go?
I said the pastor. We're both pastors. He said he was necessary. I said I wasn't. Jesus could do it all.
There you go. So pastor, right? Pastor. Definitely. We know that kind of in the future, you know, many pastors will be bivocational. So yeah.
We're laughing through doing the same thing. We kind of like, we qualified some of them. So like, he has pastor/shepherd, I have pastor/leader, and then prayer, we're like, we don't need a group, but we have to be prayer, so we're kind of qualifying the...
Be there with mission trips.
Yeah, we're the mission trips.
Okay, yeah.
Right, we did the same.
Yeah, so for like the pastor, we were like, okay, if your version of pastor is like, you know, someone in a robe and a skull, maybe that would be, but like some sort of, I mean, you know, I think of Paul's words and some are teachers, preachers, pastors, like shepherd is the word there. So probably we need some sort of shepherd.
Right. Great.
So organizational leadership.
Yeah, so depending on what, I guess, how you qualify pastor.
Okay, great. Okay, what else? Yeah?
Well, like we put the Bible, but it was like we don't need a physical Bible, but like the foundation of things. So like we had a lot of qualifiers as well. But yeah.
Well, it's interesting too, because like I have worship, and to me, worship is the Bible, it's every day, everywhere, it's the prayer, it's all that stuff. So, because they get Bible, like, well, it's, and again, not that everybody gets a Bible, they can bring their own Bible, but we have the scripture on the screen, but, foundation of scripture. But worship, again, to me, did translate to a certain day, certain time. But it's worship. How do we worship where we are and all those definitions?
Yeah.
So, I think we picked the term for a reason, how we're living it out.
Right.
And whether it's traditional or crazy. But I want to know who put you on that stop.
Yeah, definitely. Well, this is the first group I've worked with in like years that's like had qualifiers. So good job. You're like critically thinking, So very good. Anybody else want to share kind of a reflection or a thought?
Did everybody have hospitality?
Yep.
Yes.
Go away! I can only pick five. I have a lot of hope for my youth group and my prayer group.
Very good. Very good.
I didn't even have a pastor on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a great exercise to do with a congregation. I would say it needs to be preempted with a lot of laughter, right, and fun stories, because if this is the first thing you do when you talk about fresh expressions, people are going to get their little tail feathers up and think that you're blowing up the dock, right? But maybe if you're beginning to have a conversation with your congregation after the second or third or fourth meeting and there's a spirit of laughter and joking, this is always a fun way to do it. And one of the fun things to do is just say, Pastor, I'm working myself out of a job, right? To say, well, I crossed off pastor. You guys don't need me, right? And that always helps to kind of loosen up the UMW president who was like, everyone needs to write UMW. Do you have UMW circle? Do you have UMW circle? So it's a fun way, but really to help us understand kind of what makes up church. What do we actually need to kind of be church, right? What is most essential? And unfortunately, and I'll say my church very much and many that I've worked with, the things that are not essential is where we're putting all of our time and energy, right? And they're the things that are causing huge divides within our church, generally, but also locally. So this definitely helps us kind of get to the meat of what church is, and also to kind of invite the question, what are we doing, right? So now I was talking to Caleb a little bit, and I think, it always just depends on who's monitoring, right? Who's supervising this fresh expression? How much does it cost? So there's a lot of kind of qualifying factors, right? Like if you're a pastor and you're like, on my own time, I just want to go experiment with fresh expressions. For the most part, people are going to say, good on ya, go for it, right? But depending on kind of the folks you have involved, and maybe that's where you're going to start, is just kind of this 5-hour-a-week kind of experiment by yourself, right? And there's really little risk, right? And probably little accountability. And so even as we started Fresh Expressions for the Florida Conference, we started with very little risk, very little money we funneled into it. I've never been paid for my conference work, right? Very little risk, very little kind of accountability to see where this is going to go, because we knew, this might just totally go off. I never start a Fresh Expression, right? But if you have the very little risk, then you have less people kind of over you trying to say, well, this is it, this is not it, this is, But as you become kind of a bit more mature, or if you want to take this very seriously as a church, it is important to think about, well, what makes something a fresh expression? Is this a fresh expression of church? Or is this a Christian conversation group, right? And those are great too. New Christian conversation groups in new places are wonderful, right? But the Church Army research of Fresh Expressions of England said kind of these are the parameters for which we could call something a fresh expression. And so those are It's corporately Christian, a new and further group, not an existing one that has been improved. So it's not the knitting club times 10, right? But it's something new. Planters have tried to engage with non-church people in their contexts. And so we've used these at the Florida conference, kind of modified to really for our own right. Like I said, I'm not going to go to someone who's doing knitting times 10 and say, you're not a fresh expression, right? Because who cares? It's a volunteer kind of, and I can help coach her though and say, well, this might not be necessarily a full expression of a fresh expression. You're meeting, there are new people, how might we bring new people? So kind of more of a coaching model. But meets at least once a month, has a name that gives it identity, an intention to be church. So in talking with Caleb, he said, so all the fresh expressions, they were required to do like a mission service component. It's a great question because we know to be a mature church, we should have a mission service component. We also know that there are many churches that don't have a mission service component, and that's why people are saying, my school does more good than you do, right? So it's a little sad, but we know that that's true. Now, some fresh expressions when they start off, like Kayaking Church, didn't have that mission service component, right? They weren't collecting offering yet, but they did have that intention to do something missional, to be an actual church. Is it Anglican? Bishop sees it as part of the family. So for us, we say, like, is this Methodist, or is this like a Youth for Christ group meeting at my church? So there might be a great youth program that has 100 kids on a Friday night, and they have a DJ, and then they have a prayer time, and then all this stuff. But it might be Youth for Christ. It's not necessarily Methodist, right? It just kind of happens at my church, but I don't go. I'm the pastor. No one from my church goes. That's probably not a fresh expression of church for the Florida conference. Some form of recognized leadership, right? Some kind of administration today that happens in all kinds of very cool ways, right? WhatsApp. Maybe there's just a WhatsApp group. That's how the leaders communicate. That's how things are kind of done administratively. The majority of members see it as a church. So they say, I go to yoga chapel. If someone were to say, do you go to church? They would say, I go to yoga chapel. Yeah, yoga chapel is my church, right? Or yeah, I go to River Church. Aspiration for the 4 ecclesial creedal relationships.
What are they?
And so I think prayer, like for us, what we might say is like prayers, presence, gift, service, right? So those things are happening.
Should be 5 then, we have witness.
Yeah, that's right. And the intention to be 3 self in context. So that's, aimed towards God, aimed towards, ourselves, and aimed towards others as well. So we have a reaching out towards new people, even within the new kind of fresh expression.
Can you say that last again?
Yeah, so kind of a 3 self. So we have an aim towards God, right? And we have an aim towards ourselves, growing ourselves, spiritually, but then also an aim towards others.
Discipleship. It's the old Jew joy. Jesus, others, yourself.
There we go. Yeah, I think that a few times for a children's sermon. So again, I'll bring this to you. But kind of as you go, as you start fresh expressions within your church, kind of really understanding these are some of the things that can be happening. Of course, it's not going to start that way. Just like you and I did not start giving 10%, right? It might have been a decline. We didn't start going on mission trips, right? All of these things. Now, what's interesting is that some people are kind of starting with that missional component, right? So come with me on this mission trip because I want to do something good, and then some other things, format that.